In the quiet stretch of land where the sky meets fields of gold and wind whispers through the open plains, lived a man named Eli. Eli McGraw wasn't young anymore. His hands were tough as leather, and his back bore the weight of seasons. Too many winters, too many storms. He woke before dawn, drank black coffee from a chipped tin mug, and worked the earth as though it owed him something. But the truth was, Eli had stopped asking for anything long ago. His ranch stretched for miles. Cattle grazed lazily, fences stood weather-worn, and the farmhouse sat like an old sentinel, proud, but tired. Just like Eli. He had no family. No wife. No children. Not anymore. There was a time when laughter echoed through the barn. When a woman's humming filled the kitchen. When muddy boots by the door meant a child had been playing by the stream. But those days were dust, taken one by fate and time. So Eli worked. Alone. Day in, day out. The same path to the barn. The same call to the cows. The same silence in the evenings when the sky turned lavender and the porch light flickered on, though no one ever came. Until one Thursday morning. A Thursday like any other, except it wasn't. He'd put out a notice at the small-town post office 2 weeks ago. Farmhand needed. Room and board included. Experience preferred. Ask for Eli. No one called. Then, just after sunrise, as the chickens stirred and dew still kissed the grass, a figure appeared on the dirt road. Not in boots. Not in a truck. But walking. Barefoot. A girl. Thin, maybe 18 or 20. Dust on her ankles. A worn satchel over her shoulder. Hair tangled from wind and sleep. Eyes wide, but not afraid. Eli stood on the porch, arms crossed. He squinted. She didn't stop walking. When she reached the gate, she looked up at him with a calm that didn't match her age or her appearance. "I'm here about the job," she said. Her voice was soft, cracked at the edges like she hadn't spoken in days. Or maybe she was used to not being heard. Eli didn't answer right away. He looked at her bare feet, her thin arms, her pale lips. "You ain't what I expected," he finally said. She nodded. "I never am." He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way she didn't flinch. Maybe it was the stillness in her, the kind you only see in wild things and broken hearts. But he stepped aside. "Name?" he asked. She shrugged. "Don't got one you need to know. Folks used to call me June." "June," he repeated. "Like the month." "Like the hope," she said, and walked past him, barefoot on his porch, as if she belonged there all along. From that day, nothing was the same. She didn't say much. Didn't ask questions. Didn't carry a phone or play music or care for television. But she worked. Sunrise to sundown. Fixing coops. Hauling hay. Cleaning troughs. Mending fences. She learned fast. Watched Eli's every move. Matched his silence with her own. At night, she sat on the porch and stared at the stars like they owed her an answer. Eli never asked where she came from. And she never told. But little things began to change. The house smelled like baked cornbread again. Fresh wildflowers sat in a jar by the window. The barn was swept. The cows were calmer. Even the old dog, Jasper, who hadn't wagged his tail in years, began to follow her around like a shadow. And Eli, who hadn't laughed since his son's funeral, found himself chuckling when June tried to ride the stubborn pony who always threw everyone else off. One evening, as the sky turned fire orange, June sat beside Eli on the porch. Neither spoke for a long time. Then she whispered, "You ever think some folks are just searching for the place their soul belongs?" Eli looked at her. "I used to think that place was buried with the people I lost," he said. She smiled, soft and sad. "Maybe it's not buried. Maybe it's waiting. Out here." Days turned to weeks. Weeks into months. And Eli found himself waking not just to work, but to see if June had made coffee first. He began noticing things again. The way the creek shimmered when the sun hit it just right. The way birds returned to the trees near the barn. The way June hummed old folk songs when she thought no one was listening. She brought life back to the ranch. But more than that, she brought Eli back to life. He started fixing up the guest room. He repainted the porch railings. He even bought shoes for her, though she never wore them. And one night, as thunder rolled across the hills, and rain tapped the roof like a lullaby, Eli stood at the window, watching her sleep in the rocker by the fire. For the first time in years, he felt something he thought was long gone. Hope. But June wasn't just any runaway. She carried something inside her. A story. A wound. A truth she hadn't told anyone yet, not even Eli. And as spring turned to summer, and the days grew longer, something began to stir. Strangers started showing up in town, asking questions. Someone was looking for her. Not out of love, but out of control. And the peaceful ranch, once forgotten by the world, was about to become the center of a choice neither of them expected. The first sign something was off came one afternoon when Eli went to town for supplies. At the hardware store, the clerk, a talkative man named Bill, leaned over the counter and whispered, "Hey, Eli, anyone new working up at your place?" Eli stiffened. "Why?" Bill scratched his chin, avoiding eye contact. "Couple folks from the city came through yesterday. Flashy SUV. Said they were looking for a girl barefoot, young, might be in trouble. Showed a photo." Eli's jaw tightened. "Police?" "Nope. Private. Said she was family. But the kind of family that don't look for hugs, you know what I mean?" Eli left without the nails he came for. That night, he didn't say anything to June. But he watched her more closely. She was in the barn brushing down the mare, humming a tune that didn't belong to any radio station. When she caught him looking, she smiled. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "You ever run from something, June?" She paused. Her hand froze mid-stroke on the horse's flank. "Everyone runs from something," she said softly. "The question is whether it's chasing them, or whether it lives inside them." Eli didn't press further. But that night, he oiled the hinges on the barn doors, reinforced the latch on the gate, and cleaned the old shotgun that hadn't seen daylight in years. Days passed. Then one morning, a black SUV rolled past the ranch fence, slow, deliberate. June saw it too. She didn't panic. She just stood still by the chicken coop, watching as the dust settled behind the car. Her face gave nothing away. But her hands, those small, calloused hands, were clenched so tight they trembled. That evening, Eli found her packing a small cloth bag. One pair of pants. 2 shirts. A photo torn and folded of a woman with kind eyes. "I can't stay," she said, not looking at him. Eli said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, "You're not a burden here." She looked up. "I'm not afraid for me. I'm afraid for you." He stepped forward. "June, who's looking for you?" She hesitated. Then finally, "A man. My stepfather. After Mama died, she swallowed, eyes wet, but refusing to cry, he sold lies. To churches. To investors. Even to my school. Said he was saving people. But he was stealing everything." She looked down. "Including me." Eli felt his stomach twist. "Did you run away?" She nodded. "When I finally saw what he was, I took what I could and left. That was 2 months ago. I thought I could disappear." "You did," Eli said. "Until now." She tried to smile. "Then maybe it's time I disappear again." But Eli wasn't having it. "No." She blinked. "No one's chasing you off this land. You didn't just help my ranch, June. You helped me. And I'm not letting the past take you back." She stared at him for a long time. Then for the first time since she arrived, she wept. Not the kind of crying that begs for attention, but the kind that finally surrenders to the weight of being alone too long. Eli didn't speak. He just placed a weathered hand on her shoulder, and the fire crackled in the quiet. The next morning, they began preparing. Not for war, but for truth. Eli went into town and found the sheriff. Explained enough to raise concern without putting June in more danger. Turns out, that stepfather of hers, Jeremiah Crane, had warrants in 3 states. Fraud, exploitation, abuse. The man was a monster with a Bible in one hand and a ledger in the other. But no one had ever gotten him to court. Now maybe that would change. Eli offered the sheriff a deal. Let June stay hidden on the ranch, under quiet protection, while they built a case. In exchange, she'd tell what she knew slowly, safely. The sheriff agreed. But the danger wasn't over. Because by the next week, the SUV returned. And this time, it didn't drive past. It stopped. 2 men stepped out. Suits, sunglasses, clean shoes in a place where dirt clung to everything. Eli met them at the gate. Private property, he said flatly. They smiled. Too wide, too slick. We're just looking for a girl, one of them said. Barefoot, about so tall. Answers to June. She's not here, Eli lied, eyes hard. She's a witness in an important matter, the man replied. Eli crossed his arms. She's a person, not a witness, not a piece of evidence. The other man stepped forward. You're obstructing. Eli didn't move. You're trespassing. A long silence. Then, without another word, the men turned and left. But they'd be back. And Eli knew it. That night, June stood by the fence, looking out into the dark hills. Eli joined her. They won't stop, she said. Neither will we, he replied. And in that moment, something changed. She wasn't just a girl on the run anymore. And Eli wasn't just a rancher waiting for time to take the rest of his days. They were something else now. 2 broken people. 1 sanctuary. And a story that the world hadn't heard yet but would. Because truth has a way of rising. Even on the quietest ranch. Even through the smallest feet. Even when the world tries to silence it. And this was just the beginning. The men didn't return for days. But the tension never left. June began sleeping with her satchel near the bed again. Eli, though he never said it out loud, kept his old rifle on the kitchen wall, loaded. Every bark from Jasper. Every crunch of tires on gravel. Every flicker of headlights on the distant road, it put them both on edge. Still, life on the ranch carried on. Cows still needed feeding. The land still needed care. And in the slow, stubborn rhythm of chores, something healing took root. June started painting again. She found old boards behind the barn and turned them into art, not portraits, not anything polished, just wild colors and sweeping skies, emotion poured into wood and brushstrokes. Eli built her a small easel from leftover fence planks. He didn't say much, just handed it to her one morning and grumbled, "Thought you might need this." Better than leaning on a wheelbarrow. June smiled. "Thank you." 2 simple words. But they warmed something in Eli, something he didn't know was still capable of feeling warm. Then, one afternoon, the sheriff came by. Not in uniform. Not with flashing lights. Just in his old truck, with a file folder in his lap. He sat at the kitchen table with Eli and June. "There's a federal task force now," he said, spreading the papers. "Jeremiah Crane's name is all over the place. Non-profits he drained. Women he manipulated. Even a few offshore accounts we think he used to hide stolen donations." He looked at June. "But what we don't have is someone who saw it from the inside." June's eyes dropped to the table. The sheriff continued gently, "You don't have to testify. But if you do, even just to give a statement, it could help shut him down for good. Not just for you. For a lot of people." Eli didn't say anything. He just looked at her. June was silent for a long time. Then she stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the fields stretched wide and free. The horses grazed under a pale sky. Jasper trotted across the porch. Freedom. She had found it here. But maybe freedom meant more than running. Maybe it meant facing the fire not for revenge, but for others who never escaped. She turned back to the sheriff. "I'll do it," she said. Preparation began. A legal team arrived quietly. Notebooks, recorders, laptops. They met with June every day in the old living room, transforming it into a temporary office. She told her story piece by piece. The fake, healing retreats. The falsified tax forms. The lockbox he kept under his bed with documents and photos of the girls he claimed to be mentoring. Sometimes she shook when she talked. Sometimes she cried. But she never stopped. Eli stayed nearby. Sometimes on the porch. Sometimes outside the door. Not to eavesdrop. Just to be close. To anchor her in the place that had become home. And slowly, June became more than a witness. She became a survivor with purpose. She even started writing again. Late into the night. Words poured into notebooks with cracked spines. Not fiction but memories, warnings, reflections. "Maybe one day I'll turn it into a book," she said once, half joking. "You should," Eli replied. "Not enough people telling the truth." She smiled. Then came the trial. Not in their small town but in a courthouse 3 hours away, surrounded by reporters, cameras, and people she'd never met. The first day, she froze. Eli drove her there himself. She sat in the passenger seat, trembling, clutching a scarf like armor. "I can't do this," she whispered. Eli didn't argue. He just said, "Yes, you can. Because you already did the hard part, you survived." She looked at him. Tears welled in her eyes. "Do you think they'll believe me?" "I believe you," Eli said. "And sometimes, that's how belief spreads. One truth at a time." June testified. Her voice quivered at first. But then, like a fire building from a spark, it grew steady, clear. She told them everything. The manipulation. The threats. The other girls. She brought receipts literal and emotional. By the end of the day, the courtroom was silent. No cross-examination could shake what was real. And Jeremiah Crane, who had once preached to packed churches, who had smiled through televised interviews, sat frozen, his mask cracked. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The verdict: guilty. On all counts. June didn't celebrate with confetti. There were no parties. No champagne. Just a quiet ride back home in Eli's truck. Just silence, and the sound of wheels on gravel. When they pulled into the ranch, the sky was turning pink. Jasper ran out barking. The horses neighed in welcome. June stepped onto the porch, took off her shoes. She still preferred the earth under her feet, and turned to Eli. "Thank you," she said. Eli tipped his hat. "Wasn't just me." "No," she replied. "It was this place. You gave me a home." Eli looked at her, really looked. "You gave it life again." Months passed. The ranch flourished. June's art began selling online. Eli helped her ship pieces to people in cities she'd never even heard of. She published her first essay in a national magazine. It was titled Barefoot, but Not Broken. Requests poured in. Schools, advocacy groups, survivors. But she never left the ranch completely. Because sometimes, home isn't where you started. It's where someone lets you grow roots again. And every morning, before the sun peeked over the hills, 2 figures walked side by side across the land. One old, one young. Both changed. Both whole. Because sometimes, a ranch isn't just soil and livestock. Sometimes, it's the only place left in the world where healing can grow in silence, in sweat, and in the shadow of barefoot footsteps that never stop walking forward. After the trial ended, June received messages from all over the country. Young women, older men, teenagers, teachers, survivors, all saying the same thing. "Your voice gave me courage." But June wasn't after fame. She was after freedom, not just for herself, but for anyone who felt invisible, trapped, or voiceless. She called it Barefoot Truth. a non-profit that offered safe housing, therapy, legal aid, and workshops for survivors of abuse and manipulation, especially those from cult-like environments and toxic faith networks. The first center. Built on a corner of Eli's land. A small barn was converted into a retreat hall. Eli helped paint the walls himself. June brought in counselors, therapists, and volunteers. Survivors arrived from far-off places with nothing but hope in their eyes. And the barefoot girl who once walked onto a stranger's porch now stood on stages. She gave TED Talks, spoke at universities, appeared on national TV. But she never wore designer heels or makeup artist's paint. She spoke in her own voice. And yes, she often still went barefoot. It became a symbol, a message. They tried to shame me for where I came from. Now I stand firmly on it. A letter from the past. One autumn morning, as orange leaves blanketed the ranch, a letter arrived. No return address. Just a faded stamp. And a handwritten note. You don't know me anymore. But I've watched from afar. They told you I died. They lied. I had to run. To survive. I am your mother. If you still want to know the truth, come to room 6 at the Old River Inn. Tuesday, midnight. June froze. Her hands shook. She hadn't heard her mother's name in years. But this wasn't just fantasy. It was her handwriting. And suddenly, the past she thought was buried had a heartbeat again. June sat on the porch swing that night, the letter trembling in her hands. The handwriting was hers. Her mother's. After all these years after the funeral, the lies, the silence, this scrap of paper had reopened something raw and powerful inside her. A question. Could it be true? Eli stepped outside and handed her a cup of warm tea. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. She looked up at him, voice barely a whisper. She's alive. He didn't react with surprise. Just sat beside her, watching the stars. You gonna go? He asked gently. I have to. He nodded. You want me to come? She hesitated, then said, No. I think I have to face this one barefoot. Tuesday, midnight. The air was thick with silence as June pulled into the gravel lot of the Old River Inn. A rusted neon sign buzzed above the front desk. Room 6 was at the far end, porch light flickering, curtain half drawn. She walked slowly, heart pounding, each step echoing memories she thought she had buried for good. She reached the door, raised her hand to knock, then paused. The door creaked open on its own. Inside sat a woman, gray streaks in her long hair, wrinkled skin. But the eyes, those same warm, watery eyes from the only photo June had ever saved. She didn't rise. She simply whispered, You look just like her. June stood frozen in the doorway. Are you? I'm your mother, the woman said, her voice cracking. And I'm so sorry. The mother's escape. The woman's name was Lila. Years ago, she had been trapped in Jeremiah Crane's false world, abused, manipulated, silenced. When June was just 9, Lila had discovered Crane's financial crimes and tried to expose him. But he turned the story around. Told everyone she was mentally ill. Claimed she drowned while hiking near the cliffs. But she hadn't drowned. She ran. She changed her name. Disappeared into shelters. Then into cities. But the moment she heard of Crane's trial, she saw June's face on the news. I wanted to reach out sooner, Lila said, tears falling. But I was scared. I thought maybe you hated me. I never hated you, June whispered, her voice shaking. I mourned you. They embraced for the first time in over a decade. Two survivors. Two souls who'd fought alone for too long. Together again. June brought her mother home. Eli met her at the gate. Didn't ask questions. Just took her bag and nodded respectfully. Welcome, he said, with quiet warmth. The ranch transformed once again. Lila began helping at the Barefoot Truth Center, counseling other women, teaching art therapy. June and Lila started speaking together, mother and daughter sharing their intertwined story of survival, separation, and reunion. News outlets began calling it a miracle story. But June just called it unfinished healing. Months later, June released a memoir. It wasn't glossy. It wasn't pretty. But it was real. In it, she wrote, "I walked into Eli's life barefoot. But I walked into my own life for the first time. Truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, like a gate swinging open, or a letter falling into your hands." The book became a bestseller. But more importantly, it saved lives. Thousands of survivors reached out. Hundreds joined the foundation. And the ranch that once echoed only with wind and dust now echoed with laughter, healing, and the rhythm of boots and bare feet walking side by side. Because sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that reach the farthest. And the girl who walked barefoot across dry fields didn't just find home. She built one for the world. By the end of that year, the name June Ashcroft wasn't just whispered in survivor circles, it became a symbol of global courage. Her memoir, The Girl with No Shoes, was translated into 17 languages. News outlets from around the world requested interviews. Her story was even adapted into a short film in Europe. But June turned down the fame. She remained grounded. Still lived on the ranch. Still swept the porch. Still walked barefoot. And when international organizations reached out to honor her, she only accepted on one condition. "I won't stand on red carpets. I'll only stand where survivors are heard." One spring morning, a letter arrived. This time, not from her mother or a shadowy past, but from the United Nations Human Rights Council. "We are holding a global forum on survivor-led justice initiatives. We would be honored to have you speak." Eli read the letter over her shoulder. "That's big," he said with a whistle. June smiled nervously. "I don't know if I'm ready." "June," he said softly, "you've been ready since the day you walked through that gate." She stood behind a glass podium. No script. No shoes. Just her voice. World leaders watched. So did survivors. Her mother sat in the front row beside Eli, hands clasped tight. June began. "I don't speak today as a victim. I speak as a woman who walked through hell and found a garden on the other side. The world is full of people like me, barefoot, unheard, unseen. But we don't need pity. We need power. We need places that restore us. We need people who stay, not just applaud." The room was silent. Then it erupted in applause, not polite, but powerful. Tears. Hugs. Standing ovation. That night, June received 400 emails from 47 countries. And Barefoot Truth began its global chapter. Within a year, centers opened in Colombia, South Africa, Indonesia, Ukraine, Jordan. Each site was customized to its culture, but held one shared symbol. A bare footprint carved into a stone wall, always next to the words, "You are not alone. You are not broken. You are enough." June trained local teams, spoke at grassroots events, empowered other survivors to lead, not just receive. One humid morning back on the ranch, a silver SUV pulled up. A man stepped out, early 30s, backpack slung over one shoulder, camera gear in hand. "Hi," he said, adjusting his glasses. "I'm Theo. From World Witness magazine. I requested an interview with Ms. Ashcroft?" Eli raised an eyebrow. "She's in the barn. Try not to step on anything that bites." Theo smiled. Noted. He found her kneeling beside a goat, hands muddy, hair tied in a messy knot. "Are you June?" She looked up, brushed dirt from her forehead. "Depends who's asking." He smiled, gently. "Someone who's been reading your words for 3 years. Then a week." His questions weren't like the others. He didn't pry for headlines or twist her words. He listened. Really listened. And when he asked if he could photograph her, she said yes, but only in the field. Barefoot. No makeup. No studio. This is who I am, she told him. He captured her in the golden light of dusk, hair tousled by wind, face lined by quiet strength. And later, when he showed her the photos, she looked surprised. I never knew I could look free. You don't just look free, he said. You are. Their friendship bloomed softly, like wildflowers. No grand declarations. Just small conversations on the porch, laughter in the rain, and a single shared cup of coffee in the early morning when no one else was awake. But the ranch remains home. Now, it houses not just a foundation, but a school, a community garden, a trauma-informed horse program. And sometimes, when she's not in Geneva or Cape Town or Bogota, you'll find her barefoot in the fields, hair down, notebook in hand, camera beside her, and next to her Theo, usually trying to convince her to wear shoes just once. She never does, because her feet, her truth, her path, made her who she is. Because some stories don't end in a courtroom. They begin there, and bloom in bare footsteps that echo across the world.